Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mr. Manly Hall. We are in the Secret Teachings of All Times. I believe we're on chapter 11. This is the life and philosophy of Pythagoras. But before we begin, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or what I am doing, if you get lost in the weeds, if any of the terminology is confusing, I have resources linked in the top up here to several playlists. They only let me link 5. And they're down below as well as the source material so that you can get caught up. It is easy to get lost while we're discussing these things. So I like to link the resources and I will refer you to them as we go through. We are reading and discussing as we go along. If that is not the format for you, that is perfectly understandable, but some people find it enjoyable. So we're going to dive in and talk about the life and philosophy of Pythagoras. While Mensarchus, the father of Pythagoras, was in the city of Delphi on matters pertaining to his business as a merchant, he and his wife, Parthenis, decided to consult the oracle of Delphi as to whether the fates were favorable for their return voyage to Syria. When the Pythoness, prophetess of Apollo, seated herself on the golden tripod over the yawning vent of the oracle, she did not answer the question they had asked, but told Mensarchus that his wife was then with child and would give birth to a son, who was destined to surpass all men in beauty and wisdom, and who throughout the course of his life would contribute much to the benefit of mankind. Mensarchus was so deeply impressed by the prophecy that he changed his wife's name to Pythagoras in honor of the Pythian priestess. When the child was born at Sidon in Phoenicia, it was, as the oracle had said, a son. Mensarchus and Pythagoras named the child Pythagoras, for they believed that he had been predestined by the oracle. Many strange legends have been preserved concerning the birth of Pythagoras. Some maintain that he was no mortal man, that he was one of the gods who had taken a human body to enable him to come into the world and instruct the human race. Pythagoras was one of the many sages and saviors of antiquity for whom an immaculate conception is asserted. In his Anacalypsis, Godfrey Higgins writes, "The first striking circumstance in which the history of Pythagoras agrees with the history of Jesus is that they were natives of nearly the same country, the former being born at Sidon and the latter at Bethlehem, both in Syria." The father of Pythagoras, as well as the father of Jesus, was prophetically informed that his wife should bring forth a son, who should be a benefactor to mankind. They were both born when their mothers were from home on journeys, away from home on journeys, Joseph and his wife having gone up to Bethlehem to be taxed, and the father of Pythagoras having traveled from Samos, his residence, to Sidon about his mercantile concerns. Pythagoras is the mother of Pythagoras, had a connection with an apolloconical specter, or ghost, of the god Apollo, or God's soul. Of course, this must have been a Holy Ghost, and here we have the Holy Ghost. No. Which afterwards appeared to her husband and told him that he must have no connection with his wife during their pregnancy, a story evidently the same as that relating to Joseph and Mary. From these peculiar circumstances, Pythagoras was known by the same title as Jesus, namely, the Son of God, and was supposed by the multitude to be under the influence of divine inspiration. And we're going to pause and piss some people off, because I have an unconventional Bible study, and you are more than welcome to go through and understand why I say this. Jesus was not the Savior of all mankind. There was never a sacrifice required in order for you to be forgiven for sins, and therefore there was no need to put anybody on the cross so that you could be forgiven for sin. That is a fallacy spread to control you, and I stand on that more firmly these days than I ever have in my life. For the reasons outlined in the Bible study, you should definitely check that out if this stepped on your toes. And it is the same with Pythagoras. Right? God does not manifest within himself. That's the reason we are here, right? We are the individualized aspects of God, not gods of ourselves, but a tiny sliver of him, given free will and choice so that we can go and decide what we want to become with our body. The same problem is outlined here that is outlined with Jesus in at least one spot And this is going to piss people off. It does every time, but it's okay. Jesus was not the son of David, and therefore he did not fulfill any prophecy about the son of David being the redemption of mankind. He was not the son of David. If he was put in the body of Mary by the divine, with no interaction with his father, and this is reinforcing that, then he was not the father. It's literally that simple, right? If he did not put his semen in Mary, then Mary did not carry his child. She carried God's child, so it's not the son of David, and therefore it did not fulfill the prophecies for the son of David. It is really that simple. But it is even simpler. There was no sacrifice necessary, so anything based upon the sacrifice is automatically incorrect. But it's the same problem here. That wasn't his dad if it was an immaculate conception. And one of the stories is no immaculate conception, and another one is because people like to attribute divine to anybody who is a little bit extra. Somebody who is on the right thing, who has got divine inspiration in life. Oh, they must obviously be God incarnate. Nobody else can do that. That is simply minded, right? Simple minded. You're not thinking deeply enough. It's just not happening. There are so many reasons to doubt the divine origin of Jesus Christ. His own words not being the least of those. And so I do not ever place any credence whatsoever to these Son of God stories. Doesn't matter if it's Pythagoras, it doesn't matter if it's Jesus, it doesn't matter if it's Muhammad, it doesn't matter who it is. It will never be like the child of God. Now, separately, the entities who have claimed to be gods over the years, I do believe are real. They have extra powers. They can do extra things. They can look like humans even though they are not quite humans. I am fully aware that that is way in the realm of conspiratorialness. Right? That is way in the realm of speculation. I am perfectly fine with that. I point it out so that you know that it is speculation, but I do believe in the entities. I believe that there are good-based entities and there are evil-based entities. I believe that they are fighting a fight and they have been at loggerheads for all of history. That they are trying to lead the humans in this direction and that direction. And I believe that some of the ones who are good talk to some of the people over the course of the years. But I also believe that the opposite has happened. And I believe that when Abraham put his son on the altar, he was listening to an evil entity. And that a good entity came and stopped it. We talked about that in the Bible study, and there are a multitude of examples of that exact same thing. One evil entity coming and saying, do this horrible thing, and then another good entity popping in and saying, what are you doing? Don't do that. That's not correct. Stop. It happens a lot. There's a whole incident with a donkey later in life. And so the whole premise of this divine inspiration thing is just superstition as far as I am concerned. I understand that's probably going to step on toes, and that's perfectly fine. That's kind of what I'm here for. All right, back to the text. This most famous philosopher was born sometime between 600 and 590 BC, and the length of his life has been estimated at nearly 100 years. The teachings of Pythagoras indicate that he was thoroughly conversant with the precepts of Oriental and Occidental esotericism. He traveled among the Jews and was instructed by the rabbins, according to the secret traditions of Moses, the lawgiver of Israel. Later, the school of the Essenes was conducted chiefly for the purpose of interpreting the Pythagorean symbols. Pythagoras was initiated into the Egyptian, Babylonian, and Chaldean mysteries. Although it is believed by some that he was a disciple of Zoroaster, it is doubtful whether his instructor of that name was the God-man now revered by the Parsees. While accounts of his travels differ, historians agree that he visited many countries and studied at the feet of many masters. After having acquired all which it was possible for him to learn of the Greek philosophers and presumably become an initiate of the Eleusinian mysteries, he went to Egypt, and after many rebuffs and refusals, finally succeeded in securing initiation in the mysteries of Isis at the hands of the priest of Thebes. When this intrepid joiner wended his way into Phoenicia and Syria, where the mysteries of Adonis were conferred upon him, and crossing to the valley of the Euphrates, he tarried long enough to become versed in the secret lore of the Chaldeans, who still dwelt in the vicinity of Babylon. Finally, he made his greatest and most historic venture through Media and Persia into Hindustan, where he remained several years as a pupil and initiate of the learned Brahmins of Elephanta and Ellora. See Ancient Freemasonry by Frank C. Higgins, 32nd degree. The same author adds that the name of Pythagoras is still preserved in the records of the Brahmins as Yavanachara, the Ionian teacher. Pythagoras was said to have been the first man to call himself a philosopher. In fact, the world is indebted to him for the word philosopher. Before that time, the wise men had called themselves sages, which was interpreted to mean those who know. Pythagoras was more modest. He coined the word philosopher, which he defined as one who is attempting to find out. After returning from his wanderings, Pythagoras established a school, or as it has sometimes been called, a university, at Crotona, a Dorian colony in southern Italy. Upon his arrival in Crotona, he was regarded askance, but after a short time those holding important positions in the surrounding colonies sought his counsel in matters of great moment. He gathered around him a small group of sincere disciples, whom he instructed in the secret wisdom which had been revealed to him, and also in the fundamentals of occult mathematics, music, and astronomy, which he considered to be the triangular foundation of all the arts and sciences. When he was about 60 years old, Pythagoras married one of his disciples, and 7 children resulted from the union. His wife was a remarkably able woman, who not only inspired him during the years of his life, but after his assassination continued to promulgate his doctrines. As is so often the case with genius, Pythagoras, by his outspokenness, incurred both political and personal enmity. Among those who came for initiation was one who, because Pythagoras refused to admit him, determined to destroy both the man and his philosophy. By means of false propaganda, this disgruntled one turned the minds of the common people against the philosopher. Without warning, a band of murderers descended upon the little group of buildings where the great teacher and his disciples dwelt, burnt the structures, and killed Pythagoras. Accounts of the philosopher's death do not agree. Some say that he was murdered with his disciples, others that on escaping from Crotona with a small band of followers, he was trapped and burned alive by his enemies in a little house, where the band had decided to rest for the night. Another account states that, finding themselves trapped in the burning structure, the disciples threw themselves into the flames, making of their own bodies a bridge over which Pythagoras escaped, only to die of a broken heart a short time afterwards, as the result of grieving over the apparent fruitlessness of his efforts to serve and illuminate mankind. His surviving disciples attempted to perpetuate his doctrines, but they were persecuted on every hand, and very little remains today as a testimonial to the greatness of this philosopher. It is said that the disciples of Pythagoras never addressed him or referred to him by his own name, but always as the master, or that man. This may have been because of the fact that the name Pythagoras was believed to consist of a certain number of specially arranged letters with a sacred significance. The Word magazine has printed an article by T.R. Prater showing that Pythagoras was initiated by his candidates by means of a certain formula concealed within the letters of his own name. That may explain why the word Pythagoras was so highly revered. This is a photo, or an engraving, not a photo, of Pythagoras. He has a sheaf of something in his hand that is not familiar to me. It's not clear enough. There's a cock at his other hand. He's holding a book, and there is a bear. That is the sheep or a bear, and I don't know how I can confuse those two, but somehow it is a little bit confusing. During his youth, Pythagoras was a disciple of Pherecydes and Hermodamus, and while in his teens became renowned for the clarity of his philosophical concepts. In height, he exceeded 6 feet. His body was as perfectly formed as that of Apollo. Pythagoras was the personification of majesty and power, and in his presence, felt humble and afraid. As he grew older, his physical power increased rather than waned, so that he approached the century mark. He was actually in the prime of his life. The influence of this great soul over those about him was such that a word of praise from Pythagoras filled his disciples with ecstasy, while one committed suicide because the master became momentarily irate over something he had done. Pythagoras was so impressed by this tragedy that he never again spoke unkindly to or about anyone, and it is amazing how legends can grow over the years. After the death of Pythagoras, his school gradually disintegrated, but those who had benefited from its teachings revered the memory of the great philosopher, as during his life they had reverenced the man himself. As time went on, Pythagoras became to be regarded as a god rather than a man, and his scattered disciples were bound together by their common admiration for the transcendent genius of their teacher. Eduard Schur, in his Pythagoras and the Delphic Mysteries, relates the following incident as illustrative of the bond of fellowship uniting the members of the Pythagorean school. One of them, who had fallen upon sickness and poverty, was kindly taken in by an innkeeper. Before dying, he traced a few mysterious signs, the pentagram no doubt, on the door of the inn, and said to the host, "Do not be uneasy. One of my brothers will pay my debts." A year afterwards, as a stranger was passing by this inn, he saw the signs and said to the host, "I am a Pythagorean. One of my brothers died here. Tell me what I owe you on his account." Frank C. Higgins, 32nd degree, gives an excellent compendium of the Pythagorean tenets in the following outline. Pythagoras' teachings are of the most transcendental importance to Masons, inasmuch as they are the necessary fruit of his contact with the leading philosophers of the whole civilized world of his own day, and must represent that in which all were agreed, shorn of all weeds of controversy. Thus, the determined stand made by Pythagoras in defense of pure monotheism is sufficient evidence that the tradition to the effect of the unity of God was the supreme secret of all the ancient initiations is substantially correct. The philosophical school of Pythagoras was, in a measure, also a series of initiations, for he caused his pupils to pass through a series of degrees and never permitted them personal contact with himself until they had reached the higher grades. According to his biographers, his degrees were 3 in number. The first, that of Mathematicus, assuring his pupils proficiency in mathematics and geometry, which was then, as it would be now if Masonry were properly inculcated, the basis upon which all other knowledge was erected. Secondly, the degree of Theoreticus, which dealt with the superficial applications of the exact sciences. And lastly, the degree of Electus, which entitled the candidate to pass forward into the light of the fullest illumination which he was capable of absorbing. The pupils of the Pythagorean school were divided into Exoterici, or pupils in the outer grades, the Esoterici, after they had passed the 3rd degree of initiation and were entitled to the secret wisdom. Silence, secrecy, and unconditional obedience were cardinal principles of this great order. See Ancient Freemasonry. Pythagorean fundamentals. The study of geometry, music, and astronomy was considered essential to a rational understanding of God, man, or nature, and no one could accompany Pythagoras as a disciple who was not thoroughly familiar with these sciences. Many came seeking admission to his school. Each applicant was tested on these 3 subjects, and if found ignorant, was summarily dismissed. Pythagoras was not an extremist. He taught moderation in all things rather than excess in anything, for he believed that an excess of virtue was in itself a vice. Get you some, son. I've been preaching that for a while now. Y'all know that. One of his favorite statements was, "We must avoid with all our utmost endeavor, and amputate with fire and sword, and by all other means, from the body sickness, from the soul ignorance, and from the belly luxury, from a city sedition, from a family discord, and from all things excess." Pythagoras also believed that there was no crime equal to that of anarchy. Get you some. All men know what they want, but few know what they need. Pythagoras warned his disciples that when they prayed, they should not pray for themselves, that when they asked things of the gods, they should not ask things for themselves, because no man knows what is good for him, and it is for this reason undesirable to ask for things which if obtained, would only prove to be injurious. The god of Pythagoras was the monad, or the one that is everything. He described God as the supreme mind distributed throughout all parts of the universe, the cause of all things, the intelligence of all things, and the power within all things. He further declared the motion of God to be circular, the body of God to be composed of the substance of light, and the nature of God to be composed of the substance of truth. Pythagoras declared that the eating of meat clouded the reasoning faculties. While he did not condemn its use or totally abstain therefrom himself, he declared that the judges should refrain from eating meat before a trial, in order that those who appeared before them might receive the most honest and astute decisions. When Pythagoras decided, as he often did, to retire into the temple of God for an extended period of time to meditate and pray, he took with his supply of specially prepared food and drink. The food consisted of equal parts of the seeds of poppy and sesame, the skin of a sea onion from which the juice had been thoroughly extracted, the flower of daffodil, the leaves of mallows, and the paste of barley and peas. These he compounded together with the addition of wild honey. For a beverage he took the seeds of cucumbers, dried raisins, with the seeds removed, the flowers of coriander, the seeds of mallows and purslane, scraped cheese, meal, and cream, mixed together and sweetened with wild honey. Pythagoras claimed that this was the diet of Hercules while wandering in the Libyan desert, and was according to the formula given to that hero by the goddess Ceres herself. The favored method of healing among the Pythagoreans was by the aid of poultices. These people also knew the magical properties of a vast number of plants. Pythagoras highly esteemed the medical properties of the sea onion, and he is said to have written an entire volume on the subject. Such a work, however, is not known at the present time. Pythagoras discovered that music has great therapeutic power and prepared special harmonies for various diseases. He apparently experimented also with color, attaining considerable success. One of his unique curative processes resulted from his discovery of the healing value of certain verses from the Odyssey and the Iliad of Homer. These he caused to be read to persons suffering from certain ailments. He was opposed to surgery in all its forms, and also objected to cauterizing. He would not permit the disfigurement of the human body, for such, in his estimation, was a sacrilege against the dwelling place of the gods. Pythagoras taught that friendship was the truest and nearest perfect of all relationships. He declared that in nature there was a friendship of all for all, of gods for men, of doctrines one for another, of the soul for the body, of the rational part for the irrational part, of philosophy for his theory, of men for one another, of countrymen for one another, that friendship also existed between strangers, between a man and his wife, his children, and his servants. All bounds without friendship were shackles, and there was no virtue in their maintenance. Pythagoras believed that relationships were essentially mental rather than physical, and that a stranger of sympathetic intellect was closer to him than the blood relation whose viewpoint was at variance with his own. Pythagoras defined knowledge as the fruitage of mental accumulation. He believed that it would be obtained in many ways, but principally through observation. Wisdom was the understanding of the source or cause of all things, and this could only be secured by raising the intellect to a point where it intuitively cognized the invisible manifesting outwardly through the visible, and thus became capable of bringing itself en rapport with the spirit of things, rather than with their forms. The ultimate source that wisdom could cognize was the monad, the mysterious permanent atom of the Pythagoreans. Pythagoras taught that both man and the universe were made in the image of God, and both being made in the same image, the understanding of one predicated the knowledge of the other. He further taught that there was a constant interplay between the grand man, the universe, and man, the little universe. Pythagoras believed that all the sidereal bodies were alive, and that the forms of the planets and stars were merely bodies encasing souls, minds, and spirits, in the same manner that the visible human form is but the encasing vehicle for an invisible, spiritual organism, which is, in reality, the conscious individual. Pythagoras regarded the planets as magnificent deities worthy of the adoration and respect of man. All these deities, however, he considered subservient to the first cause, within whom they all existed temporarily, as mortality exists in the midst of immortality. The famous Pythagorean Y signified the power of choice and was used in the mysteries as emblematic of the forking of the ways. The central stem separated into two parts, branching to the right and the other to the left. The branch to the right was called divine wisdom, and the one to the left, earthly wisdom. Youth, personified by the candidate walking the path of life, symbolized the central stem of the Y, reaches the point where the path divides. The neophyte must then choose whether he will take the left-hand path and, following the dictates of his lower nature, enter upon a span of folly and thoughtlessness which will inevitably result in his undoing, or whether he will take the right-handed road and, through integrity, industry, and sincerity, ultimately regain union with the immortals and its superior spheres. It is important to note that my left-hand path is not this. It is probable that... Oh, wait, let's go back up to the illustration. This is the geometric solids, right? So, the symmetrical geometric solids. We have the circle, the pyramid, the cube, the I don't remember the names. One of them is the dodecahedron. There's an isocahedron. Geometry was never my strong suit. For some reason, it just will not stick, but they're going to tell us so. To the 5 symmetrical solids of the ancients is added the sphere, 1, the most perfect of all created forms. The 5 Pythagorean solids are the tetrahedron, the 4 equilateral triangles as faces, the cube with 6 squares as faces, the octahedron with 8 equilateral triangles as faces, the icosahedron with 20 equilateral triangles as faces, and the dodecahedron with 12 regular pentagons as faces. It is probable that Pythagoras obtained his concept of the Y from the Egyptians, who included a certain of their initiatory rituals as a scene in which the candidate was confronted by 2 female figures. One of them, veiled in the white robes of the temple, urged the neophyte to enter into the halls of learning. The other, bedecked with jewels symbolizing the earthly treasures, and bearing in her hands a tray loaded with grapes, emblematic of false light, sought to lure him into the chambers of dissipation. This symbol is still preserved among the tarot cards, where it is called the forking of the ways. The forked stick has been the symbol of life among many nations, and it was placed in the desert to indicate the presence of water. Concerning the theory of transmigration, as disseminated by Pythagoras, there are differences of opinion. According to one view, he taught that mortals who, during their earthly existence, had by their actions become like certain animals, returned to the earth again in the form of the beast which they had grown to resemble. Thus, a timid person would return in the form of a rabbit or a deer, a cruel person in the form of a wolf or other ferocious animal, and a cunning person in the guise of a fox. This concept, however, does not fit into the general Pythagorean scheme, and is far more likely that it was given in an allegorical rather than a literal sense. It was intended to convey the idea that human beings become bestial when they allow themselves to be dominated by their own lower desires and destructive tendencies. It is probable that the term transmigration is to be understood as to what is more commonly called reincarnation, a doctrine which Pythagoras must have contacted directly or indirectly in India or Egypt. Not necessarily. It is reincarnation, but this understanding of it is not correct in my understanding, right? I don't believe you go back down. I believe it is only a path up, and it is a voluntary path, and I have a whole theory behind that. I've actually got it wrote on the board back here, but y'all can't quite see it. The fact that Pythagoras accepted the theory of successive reappearances of the spiritual nature in human form is found in a footnote of Levi's History of Magic. He was an important champion of what used to be called the doctrine of metempsychosis, understood as the soul's transmigration into successive bodies. He himself had been an Athalides, a son of Mercury, Euphoborus, son of Panthus, who perished at the hand of Menelaus in the Trojan War, Hermotimus, a prophet of Clazomenae, a city of Ionia, a humble fisherman, and finally the philosopher of Samos. Pythagoras also taught that each species of creature had what he termed a seal, given to it by God, and the physical form of each was the impression of this seal upon the wax of physical substance. Thus, each body was stamped with the dignity of its divinely given pattern. Pythagoras believed that ultimately man would reach a state where he would cast off his gross nature and function in a body of spiritualized ether, which would be in juxtaposition to his physical form at all times, and which might be the eighth sphere or antichthon. From this he would ascend into the realm of the immortals, where by divine birthright he belonged. Pythagoras taught that everything in nature was divisible into three parts, and that no one could become truly wise who did not view every problem as being diagrammically triangular. He said, establish the triangle and the problem is two-thirds solved. Further, all things consist of three. In conformity with this viewpoint, Pythagoras divided the universe into three parts, which he called the supreme world, the superior world, and the inferior world. The highest, or supreme world, was a subtle, interpenetrative spiritual essence, pervading all things and therefore the true plane of the supreme deity itself. The deity, being in every sense omnipresent, omniactive, omnipotent, and omniscient, both of the lower worlds existed within the nature of the supreme sphere. That mimics, right? I haven't stopped this one a whole lot, right? But we're going to go ahead and do this. We talked before about God. He talked before about the divine. I believe that God is all things, right? I am very much in alignment with this overmind type of situation. I believe that God is everything. He is me, He is you, He is the space between me and you, and He is the space between me and you. He is everything that you can touch and everything that you can't. He is every single thought and every single action. And so He is intricately involved in every single thing, but not fully incorporated here on this plane. I, as well, believe that everything is divided into three sections, right? You have the physical body, which is the thing that you can touch and touch things with. You have the soul, which resides in the third eye, right? Generally speaking, it can traverse the entirety of the stack, but for the most part, you think, live, and do around the heart, but the sourcing is from the third eye. And that's where the spirit, when I refer to the soul, that's where it's going to be. The Holy Spirit is the third key of that, right? That is the becoming, the being, the action of creation. That part you don't really have control of, right? You have access to it, but not control of it. You can make requests, but you can't really direct in a purely physical sense unless you are willing to take some severe repercussions. Those three things, I believe, make up reality as we have it. It is the body, the mind, and the spirit, the Holy Trinity. It is not the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. It is the body, the mind, and the spirit. The spirit is absolutely God. It is the becoming. It is the part that you have no control over. It's the blood flow. It's the digestion, right? It's the part that takes what is and turns it into what will be. That's the Trinity to me. And so this is not entirely out of alignment with that, right? It is a different definition of pretty much the same thing. The superior world was the home of the immortals. It was also the dwelling place of the archetypes or the seals. Their natures in no manner partook of the material of earthiness, but they, casting their shadows upon the deep, the inferior world, were cognizable only through their shadows. The third, or inferior world, was home of those creatures who partook of material substance, or were engaged in labor with or upon material substance. Here, hence, this sphere was the home of the mortal gods, the demiurgi, the angels who labor with men, and also the demons who partake of the nature of the earth, and finally, mankind and the lower kingdoms. Those temporarily of the earth, but capable of arising above that sphere by reason and philosophy. The digits 1 and 2 are not considered numbers by the Pythagoreans because they typify the two supermundane spheres. The Pythagorean numbers therefore begin with 3, the triangle, and 4, the square. These, added to the 1 and 2, produce the 10, the great number of all things, the archetype of the universe. The three worlds were called receptacles. The first was the receptacle of principles, the second was the receptacle of intelligences, and the third, or lowest, was the receptacle of quantities. The symmetrical solids were regarded by Pythagoras and by the Greek thinkers after him as of the greatest importance. To be perfectly symmetrical, or regular, a solid must have an equal number of faces meeting at each of its angles, and these faces must be equal, regular polygons, i.e., figures whose sides and angles are all equal. Pythagoras, perhaps, may be credited with the great discovery that there are only 5 such solids. But there are variations of those 5. Now, the Greeks believed the world, material universe, to be composed of 4 elements: earth, air, water, and fire, and to the Greek mind the conclusion was inevitable that the shapes of the particles of the elements were those of the regular solids. Earth particles were cubical, the cube being the regular solid possessed of greatest stability. Fire particles were tetrahedral, and the tetrahedron being the simplest and hence lightest solid. Water particles were icosahedral for exactly the reverse reason, while air particles, as intermediate between the two latter, were octahedral. The dodecahedron was, to these ancient mathematicians, the most mysterious of the solids. It was by far the most difficult to construct, the accurate drawing of the regular pentagon necessitating a regular, elaborate application of Pythagoras's great theorem. Hence the conclusion, as Plato put it, that this, the regular dodecahedron, the deity employed in tracing the plans of the universe. H. Stanley Redgrove in Bygone Beliefs. Mr. Redgrove has not mentioned the 5th element of the ancient mysteries, which would make the analogy between the symmetrical solids and the elements complete. This 5th element, or ether, was called by the Hindus akasa. It was closely correlated with the hypothetical ether of modern science, and was the interpenetrative substance permeating all of the other elements and acting as a common solvent and common denominator of them. The 12-faced solid also subtly referred to the 12 immortals who surfaced the universe, and also the 12 convolutions of the human brain, the vehicles of those immortals and the nature of man. While Pythagoras, in accordance with others of his day, practiced divination, possibly erythromancy, there is no accurate information concerning the methods which he used. He is believed to have had a remarkable wheel by means of which he could predict future events, and to have learned hydromancy from the Egyptians. He believed that brass had oracular powers, because even when everything was perfectly still, there was always a rumbling sound in brass bowls. He once addressed a prayer to the spirit of a river, and out of the water arose a voice. Pythagoras, I greet thee. It is claimed for him that he was able to cause demons to enter into water and disturb its surface, and by means of the agitations, certain things were predicted. After having drunk from a certain spring one day, one of the masters of Pythagoras announced that the spirit of the water had just predicted that a great earthquake would occur the next day, a prophecy which was fulfilled. It is highly probable that Pythagoras possessed hypnotic power, not only over man but also over animals. He caused a bird to change the course of its flight, a bear to cease its ravages upon a community, and a bull to change its diet, by the exercise of mental influence. He was also gifted with second sight, being able to see things at a distance and accurately describe incidents that had not yet come to pass. The symbolic aphorisms of Pythagoras. Iamblichus gathered 39 of the symbolic sayings of Pythagoras and interpreted them. These have been translated from the Greek by Thomas Taylor. A aphorismic statement was one of the favorite methods of instruction used in the Pythagorean University of Crotona. 10 of the most representative of these aphorisms are reproduced below with a brief elucidation by their concealed meanings. Declining from the public ways, walk in unfrequented paths. By this it is to be understood that those who desire wisdom must seek it in solitude. That is true. We are dealing with philosophy and Nietzsche. We have a whole different playlist dealing with that, but that is one of the things that we are seeing there as well, right? You are going to be alone if you are on the path of enlightenment. You may find companions eventually, but you will at least start out on your own. Even the people who are closest to you will not be there with you. It is almost certain. So, seek wisdom, seek enlightenment, but understand fully from the beginning that most people don't want it. Most people do not actually want their lives to be better. Believe it or not, it is a hard thing to believe, but it is true. They are not willing to take even the simplest steps to begin to improve themselves, and that is a severe problem that we face. Number related to form. We're going to look at this real quick. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I, again, have a whole theory about this, but Pythagoras taught that the dot symbolizes the power of the number 1, the line of the power of the number 2, the surface, the power of the number 3, and the solid, the power of the number 4. Govern your tongue before all other things, following the gods. This aphorism warns man that his words, instead of representing him, misrepresent him, and that when in doubt as to what he should say, he should always be silent. I don't necessarily agree with that. There is definitely wisdom in silence. But there are times when you absolutely have to make a stand. We play by the rules, right? This can be a simulation. I fully grant that. But if it is a simulation, it has rules. And we have to abide by the rules. And sometimes the rules say shut up. A lot of the times the rules say shut up. But sometimes the rules say speak, and speak loudly, right? You should know the difference, but do not always hold your tongue. There are times to speak. The wind, blowing, adore the sound. Pythagoras here reminds his disciples that the fiat of God is heard in the voice of the elements, and that all things in nature manifest through harmony, rhythm, order, or procedure of the attributes of the deity. Assist a man in raising a burden, but do not assist him in laying it down. A student is instructed to aid the diligent, but never to assist those who seek to evade their responsibilities, for it is a great sin to encourage indolence. Speak not about Pythagoric concerns without light. The world is herein warned that it should not attempt to interpret the mysteries of God and the secrets of sciences without spiritual and intellectual illumination. That is true. I am attempting to help you to find that, right? I am operating from that, and I am seeking, endeavoring, trying so very hard to give that away, right? To help you to find it for yourself, because you can't even take it from me. I can merely show you the path. You have to walk it. I am out here doing things that would have gotten me taken out in any of these secret societies, right? The things that I am talking about in these series are the things that they want concealed from you because they feel that you are not ready. I feel like if you are investing enough to be this far into one of these videos, then you are deserving of the wisdom that comes along with it, right? Most people are not going to stay on this video. If you are truly seeking enlightenment, and my job is to give you the tools, right? Having departed from your house, turn not back, for the Furies will be your attendants. Pythagoras here warns his followers that any who begin the search for truth and, after having learned part of the mystery, become discouraged and attempt to return again to their former ways of vice and ignorance will suffer exceedingly. For it is better to know nothing about divinity than to learn a little and then stop without learning all. This saying right here is the entire reason why we talk about levels of responsibility, right? Let's do the responsibility talk real quick. You are responsible for the amount of knowledge that you possess. If you know that something is wrong and you do it, then you are responsible for it. You are kind of responsible for the things that you don't understand in great part, right? So if you accidentally take a life not understanding that it was incorrect, there are repercussions, but they are not the same repercussions as you walking in knowing full well that you're about to take a life, right? The karmic spiritual implications of that are two completely different things. That is true with every single piece of knowledge that you possess. Every single thing that you know, you are responsible for. So if you know that theft is bad and you get the wrong change, right? Somebody gives you an extra $1 when they broke your 20. You're a thief. And you are responsible for that because you know that that is theft. It breaks down that simply across every single thing ever. And you don't have to like that. But it is one of the 8 laws of creation. You will face the repercussions of the things that you know. So you must act accordingly. That is why in so many of these videos, before we even start, if I know that there will be a level of responsibility given out, I warn you. If you continue in the video, you will receive information in which you will be responsible. Once you know, you are responsible for it. So you cannot return. It is that simple. I can never go back to believing that somebody had to die for my sins. I know better now. I didn't before. I was perfectly fine. If you were fine with somebody else's sacrifice for your sins, you're probably going to be all right regardless. You are going to live according to that, hopefully. But if you don't, then you've got a problem. So if your level of understanding is this, Jesus died for me. Jesus died for my sins. He bled on the cross for my sins. And then you continue to sin. You are responsible for that. And no amount of saying I'm sorry is going to take place of it. If you are intentionally committing the sins that you hold as sins, then you are responsible for that. And no amount of someone else's blood is going to take that away, even in your own doctrine. And so you have levels of responsibility regardless of whether you know about them. But now you know about them. Now you're stuck being responsible. Now you have to do the right thing. And that's why I warn you. Because once you know you are responsible, period, the end. It does not get any simpler than that. Next. Nourish a cock, but sacrifice it not, for it is sacred to the sun and moon. 2 great lessons are concealed in this aphorism. The first is a warning against the sacrifice of living things to the gods, because life is sacred and man should not destroy it, even as an offering to the deity. The second warns man that the human body, here referred to as a cock, is sacred to the sun, God, and the moon, nature, and should be guarded and preserved as man's most precious medium of expression. Pythagoras also warned his disciples against suicide. And this one right here shits on Christianity. It shits on Judaism, and that's perfectly fine because I have done that myself. This is a reiteration of what I just said, right? No sacrifice is required for you to be forgiven for sin, except you to give up your sin. If you are sacrificing an animal and thinking that's going to be good enough, it isn't. Like, if you are literally convinced that it is enough and you actually change your ways after doing it, then it'll work. And it's really shitty to say that, but you can sacrifice a chicken. You can't now, not after this video, but you could have before, right? If you believe that the chicken was going to forgive your sins, and you sacrificed the chicken in the way that was genuine and honest, and you changed your ways, then it would help you. That's not saying that the chicken did a damn thing, but that belief, that knowledge that you have is enough to get you where you need to go because you changed your ways. But if you cut that chicken's head off and you continue to do the thing and get another chicken the next day, it's a problem. That's where it comes into play, right? All life is sacred, but we eat living things. If you don't, you die. Plants are alive. Even if you're a vegan, you're still killing things to eat. Even if it's falling off the tree, it is something dead that you are eating. So death is a necessity for life. Things have to die, but it should not be arbitrary. You should not be killing for fun. Right? You should not be out there killing for fun. Right? If you're going to eat the meat, collect your trophy, no problem. But if you're just collecting trophies, then you are the problem. It is the same. Life is sacred, but death is sacred too. It is, like, once again, not letting either of the extremes rule you. I mean, the extremes of life and death are a thing too, so walk the middle. Life is a thing, death is a thing. Don't touch either pillar. And suicide, right? People say suicide is an unforgivable sin. I don't necessarily believe that, but it is not an option that should ever be taken. I'd say that as someone who has attempted it, I sucked on a shotgun and pulled the trigger 3 times. I attempted to overdose. I did all kinds of stupid things to try to inadvertently kill myself. I was that. Right? I don't claim that in my life anymore, so I'm not going to say I am that, but I was. It is never the option to take. It really isn't. And you're not condemned to hell, in my estimation, for doing it. I just believe that you failed the test. And it is the stupidest way to fail the test. But it is what it is. Next, receive not a swallow in your house. This warns the seeker after truth not to allow drifting thoughts to come into his mind, nor shiftless persons to enter his life. He is to surround himself with rationally inspired thinkers and conscientious workers, which is why you will be alone in the journey, right? Almost nobody is a rationally inspired thinker. It is true. Like, you probably are. If you're watching this, you are seeking knowledge, and that is more than most people. Most people are perfectly fine sitting around watching Netflix or football. There is no intelligence involved in that. There is no thinking involved in that, and that's not even to cast judgments upon it. It is not something that I partake in. I don't really care to watch anything that comes on the television. I watch people doing what I am doing right here. I watch people who are talking about learning things. I watch people who are talking about current events and what is actually going on in the world, as opposed to the propaganda that is on the magic boxes. But I do not expect people to be rational around me, because most people are not. I don't expect them to be conscientious, because most people are not. But I will absolutely be the example of it. And I will not allow you to be around me if you don't want the same thing. Like, I don't care if you are at your best. That is not what I'm after. I want you to want to be your best. And if you want to be your best and you are actually striving for it and not just paying lip service to it, then you are more than welcome with me at any point in time. We can sit down and we can talk about frivolity, like the most trivial things. And that is perfectly fine. That is not the problem. It is when you are only concerned with that's a problem. And if you surround yourself with people who do not want the best for themselves, they will never want the best for you. And if they don't want the best for you, they are holding you back from getting the best for yourself. And you owe it to you to be the best you that you can be. That is my entire goal. My entire goal. Like, there are pieces to my goal, but they all add up to that one thing. I want to be the best me that I can be. I want to be the me that God designed me to be. And if that means I'm stepping on toes, it means I'm stepping on toes. And if it means I'm biting my tongue, I'm biting my tongue. And if it means I'm fighting somebody, I'm fighting somebody. But I'm going to be the best I can be, and I am going to be surrounded by nothing but rational thinkers and conscientious workers. That is all that is going to happen there. Offer not your right hand easily to anyone. This warns the disciple to keep his own counsel and not offer wisdom and knowledge, his right hand, to such as are incapable of appreciating them. The hand here represents truth, which raises those who have fallen because of ignorance. But as many of the unregenerate do not desire wisdom, they will cut off the hand that is extended in kindness to them. Time alone can effect the redemption of the ignorant masses. That is true. Now, I am directly violating this, right? I am offering wisdom to the entirety of the internet. Anybody with an internet connection can get on here and see the things that I am saying. And you may think that I am not wise, and that is perfectly fine. I'm okay with that. But I feel like I have a little bit of experience through life. I have been through some serious shit, and I feel like I have come out on the other side of it. I have, at least in part, attained enlightenment. Does that mean that I am perfectly enlightened? Absolutely not. Does that mean that I am done on this journey? Absolutely not. But I am at least one step ahead of almost everybody else. As far as I know, as a matter of fact, I have not seen anybody who has actually demonstrated to me that they hold the same level of knowledge on this that I do. There are a lot of people who are really close, but they haven't made the leap yet in the same way that Nietzsche did. Like, Nietzsche got so close to enlightenment that it is sad, right? It is remarkably sad that he remained consumed with depression and anxiety. He was so close to the overcoming, and he never made the leap, and that is horrible. And rising, wait, when rising from the bedclothes, roll them together and obliterate the impression of the body. Clean your room. Pythagoras directed his disciples who had awakened from the sleep of ignorance into the waking state of intelligence to eliminate from their recollection all memory of their former spiritual darkness. For a wise man, in passing, leaves no form behind him which others less intelligent, seeing, shall use as a mold for the casting of idols. Yeah. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this. We are trying to illuminate, and I am getting rid of my spiritual darkness. I used to be a Christian. I know, stepping on toes. But if you have watched the Bible study, you will understand. I took off them glasses, right? I had glasses with a pair of lenses on them. And one of those lenses said that the Jews were the chosen people. And the other lens said that Jesus absolutely had to die for your sins. And I believed that. And then one day, I said, you know what? I'm going to read the Bible as though those two things are not true. And then I saw what it actually said. I read it with a free mind of not having these glasses on. And it was a whole different book. Like, looking at it as though, well, maybe the Jews were not actually the chosen people. Not even firmly stating that, but like believing that it was possible. I went back and read that book, and it gave me some severe problems, so I had to change. And part of what I do here is casting the light on those idols, because worshiping the cross is an idol. Believing that somebody else had to die for your sins is an idol. That is something that is holding you back. That is not to say that sin is acceptable, ever. In any say, but sin is a relative term. Some people think that if you have a single sip of alcohol, you are sinning, and that is breaking God's law, and that is not true. In any way, shape, or form, even by the own book, right? You're not supposed to be a drunkard, but you're not allowed to have alcohol. When I got married in the Baptist church, we had the reception at the church, and of course, no alcohol, because you got two Baptists, you can't have alcohol. But I was not allowed to dance with my own wife, because it was sinful to dance with your own wife. That's silly, right? That's an idol that you have built up, that dancing with your spouse is going to cause you to go to hell is an insane one to me. And that was one of the keys that started me waking up. The most famous of the Pythagorean fragments are the golden verses, ascribed to Pythagoras himself, but concerning whose authorship there is an element of doubt. The golden verses contain a brief summary of the entire system of philosophy forming the basis of the educational doctrines of Crotona, or, as it is more commonly known, the Italic school. These verses open by counseling the reader to love God, venerate the great heroes, and respect the demons and elemental inhabitants. They then urge man to think carefully and industriously concerning his daily life, and to prefer the treasures of the mind and soul to accumulation of earthly goods. The verses also promise that if he will rise above his lower material nature and cultivate self-control, he will ultimately be acceptable in the sight of the gods, be reunited with them, and partake of their immortality. It is rather significant to note that Plato paid a great price for some of the manuscripts of Pythagoras, which have been saved from the destruction of Crotona. See Historia Theorum Fatidicorum, Geneva, 1675. Pythagorean astronomy. According to Pythagoras, the position of each body in the universe was determined by the essential dignity of that body. The popular concept of his day was that the Earth occupied the center of the solar system, that the planets, including the sun and moon, moved about the Earth, and that the Earth itself was flat and square. Contrary to this concept, and regardless of criticism, Pythagoras declared that fire was the most important of all the elements, that the center was the most important part of every body, and that just as Vesta's fire was in the midst of every home, so in the midst of the universe was a flaming sphere of celestial radiance. This central globe he called the Tower of Jupiter, the globe of unity, the grand monad, and the altar of Vesta.
as the sacred number 10 symbolized the sum of all parts and the completeness of all things, it was only natural for Pythagoras to divide the universe into 10 spheres, symbolized by 10 concentric circles. These circles began at the center with the globe of divine fire. Then came the 7 planets, the Earth, and another mysterious planet called Antikython, which was never visible. Opinions differ as to the nature of Antikython. Clement of Alexandria believed that it represented the mass of the heavens. Others held the opinion that it was the moon. More probably it was the mysterious 8th sphere of the ancients, the dark planet which moved in the same orbit as the Earth, but which was always concealed from the Earth by the body of the sun, being in exact opposition to the Earth at all times. In this, the mysterious Lilith concerning which astrologers have speculated so long. Isaac Meyer stated, the Pythagoreans held that each star was a world having its own atmosphere, with an immense extent surrounding it of ether. See the Kabbalah. The disciples of Pythagoras also highly revered the planet Venus, because it was the only planet bright enough to cast a shadow. As the morning star, Venus is visible before sunrise, and as the evening star, it shines forth immediately after sunset. Because of these qualities, a number of names have been given to it by the ancients. Being visible in the sky at sunset, it is called Vesper, and as it arose before the sun, it was called the false light, the star of the morning, or Lucifer, which means the light bearer. Because of this relation to the sun, the planet was also referred to as Venus, Astarte, Aphrodite, Isis, and the mother of the gods. It is possible that, at some seasons of the year in certain latitudes, the fact that Venus was a crescent could be detected without the aid of a telescope. This would account for the crescent which is often seen in connection with the goddesses of antiquity, the stories of which do not agree with the phases of the moon. The accurate knowledge which Pythagoras possessed concerning astronomy he undoubtedly secured in the Egyptian temples, for their priests understood the true relationship of the heavenly bodies many thousands of years before that knowledge was revealed to the uninitiated world. The fact that the knowledge he acquired in the temples enabled him to make assertions requiring 2,000 years to check proves why Plato and Aristotle so highly esteemed the profundity of the ancient mysteries. In the midst of comparative scientific ignorance, and without the aid of any modern instruments, the priest-philosophers had discovered the true fundamentals of universal dynamics. An interesting application of the Pythagorean doctrine of geometric solids as expounded by Plato is found in the Canon. Nearly all the old philosophers, says its anonymous author, devised a harmonic theory with respect to the universe, and the practice continued until the old mode of philosophizing died out. Kepler, 1596, in order to demonstrate the Platonic doctrine that the universe was formed of the 5 regular solids, proposed the following rule. The earth is a circle, the measurer of all. Round it describe a dodecahedron. The circle enclosing this will be Mars. Round Mars describe a tetrahedron. The sphere enclosing this will be Jupiter. Describe a cube around Jupiter. The sphere containing this will be Saturn. Now, inscribe in the earth an icosahedron. The circle inscribed in it will be Venus. Inscribe an octahedron in Venus. The circle inscribed in it will be Mercury. Mysterium Cosmographicum, 1596. This rule cannot be taken seriously as a real statement of the proportions of the cosmos, for it bears no real resemblance to the ratios published by Copernicus in the beginning of the 16th century. Yet, Kepler was very proud of his formula and said he valued it more than the electorate of Saxony. It was also approved by those 2 eminent authorities, Tycho and Galileo, who evidently understood it. Kepler himself never gives the least hint of how his precious rule is to be interpreted. Platonic astronomy was not concerned with the material constitution or arrangement of the heavenly bodies, but considered the stars and planets primarily as focal points of the divine intelligence. Physical astronomy was regarded as the science of shadows, philosophical astronomy the science of realities. And we have 2 more illustrations, the Tetractys, Theon of Smyrna declares that the 10 dots, or tetractyls, of Pythagoras was a symbol of the greatest importance. For the discerning mind, it revealed the mystery of universal nature. The Pythagoreans bound themselves by the following oath: by him who gave our souls to Tetractys, which hath the fountain and root of ever-springing nature. The cube and the star. By connecting the 10 dots of the Tetractys, 9 triangles are formed. 6 of these are involved in the forming of the cube. The same triangles, when lines are properly drawn between them, also reveal the 6-pointed star with a dot in the center. Only 7 dots are used in forming the cube and the star. Kabbalistically, the 3 unused corner dots represent the threefold, invisible, causal nature of the universe, while the 7 dots involved in the cube and the star are the Elohim, the spirits of the 7 creative periods. The Sabbath, or 7th day, is the central dot. Okay, so there was one thing we wanted to talk about right here. Tychos is mentioned, right? Tycho and Galileo. Let's kick it around here. Tychos and Galileo. There is an alternate theory on universal mechanics. It is known as the Tychos theory. I linked it in the video yesterday. I probably won't link the resource again, but the Undying Stars will give you a good place to start looking for that. The Tychos model appears to be more correct than the Copernican model. It is not a we revolve around the sun model, and not quite a everything revolves around us model, but it gives a alternative view as to what probably is actually going on. Another thing to note here is that the 8th realm that they are talking about here, the 8th planet that is not seen, the 8th influence that is not known, is probably the precognitor of the disaster cycle, the 12,000 year disaster cycle, which is absolutely trackable and provable, and they just came out with a pretty good paper showing that the 6,000 year mini cycle in between is trackable as well. And so it is entirely possible that the catalyst, Planet X, Planet Nemesis, Nibiru, whatever you want to call it, I believe that there will be a catalyst entering into our solar system that will trigger the sun stuff, right? The grounding out that is going to happen. I believe that the moon is going to play a big part of that as well. But Tychos gives us a better representation of how the universe works, and the Thunderbolts Project and Suspicious Observers will give you a good idea of what this missing piece might be. Also, Gil Broussard does a good job of tracking down and throughout history the appearance of this thing, as well as Jason Brashears over at Archaics has a good tracking, well, a almost good tracking of how these things go down. I think that's going to just about cover everything that we needed to cover here today, so I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this one up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and that I have a tendency to step on some toes when I relay those beliefs. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I am here to tell you things, not convince you of things, and the things that I tell you are, in my estimation at least, a truth. The levels of responsibility, the 8 parts of existence, the things that I talk about are, in my estimation, truth, right? I can't say firmly, but they have proven consistent as far as I can tell. I cannot pick holes in it. I have tried. And so that's what I go with. That's what I am relaying. I'm hoping I am bringing some enlightenment and wisdom. There are keys here. You have to use them. I cannot force you to use them. I can't make you pick them up. But if you are watching this far in this video, you want them. Go back and get them. They are freely available. They will always be freely available. Even if I put out a book, which is definitely a possibility, where I line this stuff out so that you got a resource without having to go back to the videos. The book will cost money, but this part will always be free. Right? I'm not doing membership only. I'm not doing that mess because This is about helping everybody. I am throwing levels of responsibility out there. I am pulling back the veils of mystery, the shrouds of whatever. That is my firm intention. And I may get some things wrong, but if I do, it is unintentional. And I am willing to be corrected. If you like what I'm doing, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree, if it remains respectful, it gets to stay up. I will listen to the things you say. But just because I listen does not mean that I will change my mind. Right? I have probably heard the argument that you're going to make. Just know that going in. Don't get butthurt if I don't listen to it. I will eventually tell you why I believe you're wrong. I will try to do it respectfully, but I stand where I stand for very firm reasons, for very valid reasons, and I have spent a lot of time considering this. Right? If I had a degree, people would listen more, but I don't. I'm just some random redneck who likes to learn things and likes to teach things. And I have learned some things, and I am teaching some things. And hopefully it is bringing a little bit of enlightenment. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.